Right, everyone, thanks for coming. Today is a topic talk session. So topic talks are a new program that we added last semester. And it's where we get to focus on specific topics. So we've covered things like IP before. Earlier this semester, we covered experimentation. I think our most recent was about venture funding, how ventures can fund their operations. Speaking of, our guest Caleb Rogers today is at a venture funded company at the moment. So Voltus is described as a virtual power plant. And so they do load balancing. I think one of the unique things that they do with that is that the customer gets paid as a result of the work that they do. Caleb leads one of the sales teams there and just landed the Virginia contract for their company. So congrats for that. Caleb's a grad, so he represents the type of student that we really like to advocate for at the Hub. One that comes from other disciplines, not business, but integrates business ideas with other domains. And so now he's actually on city council. I think he got on city council in 2020, Is that right?
Yep.
As a student.
That's right.
Yeah. So he campaigned won the seat on city council. Obviously to bring a younger perspective. He's worked to increase affordable housing and adopt a climate action plan in Williamsburg. They completed their first greenhouse gas audit just last year, I think. Loves reading, just registered a company to try to go after a Department of Energy grant. So I think he'll probably tell us a little bit about that. But he's going to tell us about the intersection of clean energy and policy, just given his interests in the space. So
Yeah.
Welcome, Caleb.
All right.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for everyone who's taking some time out of their day. I did make sure to eat lunch before this, so I'll be probably not too long-winded, but I lunch and interested in hearing about, like Graham said, the intersection of energy and policy. I'll first say that I think the way I've tried to approach this as I've designed it is taking some history lessons from Voltus, which has been around now 8 years, and trying to go a little bit into the history of the company, but more balance that with practical advice for people who have entrepreneurship experience, might want to launch a venture of their own one day. So I'm going to really try to balance a little bit of information about our sector with some of the things that we as a company have learned. And then the other piece of that is talking about how, on the policy perspective, the city of Williamsburg tries to benefit the small business community and businesses that are just growing here. So I also want to recognize my colleague, City Councilwoman Barb Ramsey, for coming today. Also a champion longer than I have been for business in Williamsburg. I do first want to say that it does feel really, really good to be back here. It was not too long ago, as I see it, that I was, the clicker
Might have messed you up. Hang on.
All right. Well, I will say in 2019, that as a lead-in, a student, I graduated in 2020 and really interested in entrepreneurship as a potential, as a potential for a career path of my own. And for that reason, I was happy, thank you, Graham, to participate in the Rocket Entrepreneurship Pitch of February 1st in 2019. I got to do it I was joking before this, not this entrepreneurship center, right? But back when we were on the 3rd floor of the business school, really tucked away. And Graham was very kind to be there and be so supportive of the entrepreneurship community, which he has been throughout his tenure at William & Mary. I do remember, though, in getting the $100, asking, is this like a contract? Do I need to spend this on the venture itself? And he said, no, you can do whatever you want. You can even spend it at Brick House on pizza. And I remember him saying pizza. I don't remember exactly what I spent it on. It probably was a little more of a Brick House pickleback shots, not the pizza, but it was nice to have at least the support of the William & Mary community. As far as what the venture was, I put a note here to the right of the slide as a link and a thank you to Bruce Jacobson, because I had come that day to pitch an idea of a website that would be a conglomerate of William & Mary and Williamsburg events, which were exciting in our community. Think about live shows, think about breweries and deals they have going on. Think about the fun things that Busch Gardens does outside of the normal roller coasters. And the idea was Williamsburg can sometimes, especially when you're a student, be seen as maybe a sleepier town. I learned in getting involved that it's not always that case. And so the idea of the website was Thrillsburg. I say credit to Bruce Jacobson here because he then deserves the rest of the credit in actually finding intelligent students to help launch this website, scraping calendars online to pull those events into a central source. So you can actually right now go to thrillsburg.com. That is to the credit of Bruce Jacobson, why I was saying I was hoping he was here today. So like Graham mentioned, I'm planning to speak on energy and policy. And the 4 areas within that would be within energy, a little bit of the history of Voltus, mixing in, like I mentioned, the practical information around launching and growing a clean energy startup, but also want to include some information around how this sector is growing for students in the room, wondering where your careers may go. I have some ideas about areas of growth that are exciting. And then mixing in policy, I'd like to talk a little bit about how the Williamsburg community grows our small business and supports our small business community with closing on a case study that is around the federal backing and encouragement of private sector dollars. And that's around the Inflation Reduction Act, which took place August 16th of 2022. As I mentioned, though, I want to make sure that I don't see eyes glaze over or any boredom by just going deep into the nuances and weeds of the electricity markets, or by talking too much about passions of mine as far as local government goes, of which there are several. So these are some of the questions that I hope to answer, which are hopefully more applicable to mentors in the room, to students in the room, right? It's not just what market did Voltus recently enter in, it's also, well, how do we hire? And how do we try to maintain our culture? For the local city councils, where can I go to look at grants? And what are examples of federal programs which have spurred private investment? So you'll sort of see me wear in that way 2 hats today. Starting with clean tech, I want to tell the story of Voltus in 5 parts here. So a little bit about our industry. This is the first part of what you might see is step 1 of creating a company. I do see we have some William and Mary founders in the back of the room too, who maybe can commiserate with this. And this is actually finding your mission and figuring out when your opportunity is right to launch. So I work at Voltus. I am an inside sales manager at Voltus. I started out in the company 2021, March 1st, doing the cold calling, cold outreach work to industries that use a lot of energy, asking them to help reduce their power for 3 reasons. Benefit to their common man in that they are helping provide reliability to the energy grid, reduction of their actual carbon emissions just in using less energy, of which we can quantify their metric tons reduction per year, and 3, actually, as Graham mentioned, getting paid. The way that Voltus operates is as a middleman in a grid which constantly has to balance demand and supply. We have not yet reached maturity on energy storage so that you can tap into assets that have stored energy because of greater production from, let's say, solar or wind power. And so in that way, demand frequently getting into the season of summer, which we're headed towards, can outstrip supply. And there are therefore 2 ways to solve that, demand and supply. You can either on the supply side, turn on more generating assets, usually very inefficient fossil fuel powered peaking power plants, or you can lower demand. So it's 2011, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, in a ruling called FERC Order 745, says that companies like Voltus were considered a curtailment service provider, so a CSP. We have to be compensated at the same rate, what was called the locational marginal price, as generating assets. So really what that means in less parlance is the creation of a megawatt, you have to compensate that at the same rate as the creation of a negawatt with an N. Meaning if I am the grid operator, I am paying the same for the creation of a megawatt or the reduction of 1 megawatt on the grid, referred to as a negawatt. That is what spurred the demand response industry, is this way to balance energy usage in a little more of a modern aged way. However, this did not appease our industry groups. If you're a fossil fuel generation company, then you don't want to see competition come in that can more cheaply at better margins create energy. So there was an effort to reverse this FERC ruling. And in 2014, the Circuit Court of Appeals, the DC Circuit Court, overruled FERC and said they've overstepped their bounds legally. Negawatts and megawatts do not have to be compensated at the same rate. Our former CEO has described this as the asteroid that hit the demand response industry. It simply meant that our product and service could have been compensated at a much, much lesser rate. So that's 2014. For the next 2 years, Greg Dixon, our former CEO, led a effort in front of the US Supreme Court to reverse this ruling. And in 2016, actually received US Supreme Court reversal of the reversal, if you will, that backed FERC Order 745 and said, in fact, negawatts, megawatts, they can be compensated the same. At that point, though, the industry had effectively been decimated. And so Greg started to get the band back together. He had come from a company called Internoc, and he then hired, to get to the next point here on hiring, a VP of engineering, a VP of operations in 2016. In 2017, he hired a VP of sales. And in that year, 2017, we grew to 40 people. So kind of mixing in here the idea of the regulatory space being ever changing and it being important to monitor it. But in the case of positive support from that industry, there really can be economic opportunities made. So then getting into hiring. One of the things that I think Voltus does more on the practical side that's really beneficial is we post publicly and online all of our diversity statistics on the website. We are a company that recruits internationally. We're completely virtual, even pre-pandemic. So it is of interest to people not in being able to show up to an actual HQ to be able to say, well, how many women are at this company? How many men? How many people of color? How many non-binary people? And that's something that Voltus has decided from a corporate standpoint is important, is actually publishing what is the diverse makeup of our company, recognizing that diverse backgrounds actually lead to better business decisions. And then in preparation for this talk, I also spoke to our CEO about some of her recommendations as far as hiring. So on the left side of the screen here, you'll see some of the ways that Voltus, for Dana Guernsey, our current CEO, or for myself in a hiring capacity, tries to look at interested applicants in a particularly critical way, right? Really getting into the interests of their coming into the industry. First thing we want to see is that they are aligned with our mission. And so one piece of practical advice is create watchwords in your business. Voltus is BGG, and that is that we want every person who comes into the company to be bright, gritty, and good. Want to be intelligent, want to be hardworking, you just want to have high moral character. And so that's a helpful framework to look through when you're then trying to hire someone is, are they BGG? A question I sometimes ask is, your resume shows me that you're bright and you're gritty. Give me an example of one time where you've been good, professionally, personally, socially, where you just have exhibited a high moral character. I get really good answers for that. The second is we want to see that person dig into actually questioning Voltus as a way to show that they are particularly interested in our company. For founders in the room, you probably know that personnel and hiring is such a challenge. There's a limited workforce. You want to find great people. As an applicant, though, we've probably all been in the position of the mass blanketing of applications. I was advising my brother recently on how to use ChatGPT to quickly pump out cover letters based on your own experience from your resume, but not needing to then sit down for 2 hours to write one cover letter. Point is, you apply a lot of places. So one of the other things that a thread we try to pull on at Voltus is asking someone, what are your questions for us? And really expecting and hoping that they would have in-depth particular questions. Last question that I'll talk about here is I've gotten into asking, how did you prepare for this interview? As a really helpful question. And it shows, did someone check me out on LinkedIn as like a quick thing 10 minutes before the interview? Or did they devote time aside the last several nights to saying, how does this work? I'm going to listen to every podcast from the Voltus founder, read all the recent press releases. And so this has helped us as we think about hiring. And I'll get into in a later slide culture, but one of, as I define it, the two important pieces of culture is just great people. And so this is how Voltus approaches our hiring. It's looking through the lens of bright, gritty, and good people and trying to get into the weeds as we go through that process. So then we get into developing products. Timeline wise, it's 2016, 2017 at Voltus. We're a team of a couple dozen people, not very many, but really trying to disrupt the industry. Our effort to develop products was a Silicon Valley-esque fail fast mantra, in that we recognize that first we have to figure out in any industry, as you would, what is the actual market need that's not being served, especially after you had such regulation decimate the industry. And then the second is, let's not have a consultant come in to tell us what our experience can be entering a product into that market. Let's instead enroll, for us, a 100 kilowatt resource, which is tiny, into a new market to see what our experience is. Does it make money? Is it too difficult? Does it need to scale to be higher to make money? This is an example then of that first point, which is take the market need first and then develop your product around it. And so this is a very simple platform that our customers get to use. We understood that if you're a customer of Voltus, candidly, you're not thinking of demand response almost all the time, except for those times where we reach out and we say, the grid is overloaded, we need you to reduce your power. And in some cases, depending on what service you use, we need you to reduce it within 10 minutes. So if I'm one of these sites, I need to be able to, if I'm a plant manager at a plastics manufacturer, go online at all times and see not only what my real-time energy usage is and what my need to lower it is, but also how many sites are enrolled with how many kilowatts, how much money did I earn last year, and what is my forecasted earnings so that I can budget for it in the next year. So this is our Volt app. It's the Voltus platform that we use to hopefully make that customer experience very seamless. Getting a little more into the practical advice, I want to talk now on three things. The first is the advice of look at business decisions in a way of you have one-way doors and two-way doors, right? So this is a graph showing, dependent on the strenuousness of a project or the importance of that project, you very well might be able to make that decision once before it's astronomically bad to reverse it. Example for us would be early days, first couple of weeks, Voltus has Salesforce as our CRM platform. To switch to another one would be incredibly difficult. It might be a quarter of lost productivity for our sales team and energy markets team to switch to a new platform. An example of a two-way door is that we have a small piece of hardware, or mostly a SaaS company, small piece of hardware called the Voltlet. And in inputting that in a company, we charge them a certain amount per month for the visibility of every 30-second granularity, being able to see what their real-time energy usage is. Finding out the proper fee structure for that Voltlet is a pretty fluid process. We can charge for larger customers a larger fee, for smaller customers a smaller fee, right? It does not have to be completely set. And so that's a two-way door. That's why I put hats, haircuts, and tattoos here. You can switch hats every day, right? You can choose no hat, you can choose another hat. Haircuts are a little different. You might get a bad haircut. It's going to grow back eventually though. So it's not a two-way door completely, but you will get another do-over. Tattoos are probably a one-way door. Unless you want to shell out eventually, which I don't think anyone in getting a tattoo plans for, the laser removal surgery, that's a one-way door. So more on the practical advice, this is how we look at how we grow, is the one-way and two-way doors. Those doors that are one way, you need to really spend more time on. Then we get into finding funding. Voltus is, as Graham said, venture backed. We've done 3 fundraising rounds from 2017 to 2021, about 10, 20, and 30 million for each, for a total of 65. In 2021, there was a great interest from the industry in going public via a SPAC. I imagine most people in the room are familiar with it. Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation allows you to go public by merging with a currently public company. In 2019, to give you some context here, the SPAC market totally, as far as dollars raised, was $13 billion. By 2021, that was $160 billion. In 2022, it was back to $13 billion. There was a very significant increase in SPAC interest and then a sheer drop-off, mostly because of regulatory concerns. Gary Gensler's SEC, they were concerned about financial projections and the regulations which were not being adhered to in the little less regulatory onerous SPAC process. And investors getting into late 2021 had realized that some of the companies they'd invested in and SPAC'd off of had really not performed as well as they would have hoped. Probably the most famous is Virgin Galactic. So this is a bit of a story in 2 parts here. I have always kind of laughed at the second headline. Voltus says SPAC breakup was mutual. Reminds me a little of like breakup. Yeah, it's like it was mutual actually, but it was. It was our recognizing, as you see in the first headline in late 2021, there is a market demand for what we have. I'll get into it in a sec, but there is a real offensive and defensive reason to put $200 million on our balance sheet. But then as the year progressed, and I think, August of 2022, we realized that the regulatory environment is getting harder, the rates are getting higher, and we didn't want to go public at a $10 stock price, only to then quickly, a couple months in, plummet to $2. So on the reasons as far as why to SPAC and why to look into, where to look into, I should say, finding funding, our C-suite team, not necessarily me, but we looked at it from an offensive and defensive perspective. From an offensive side, there are things that you can do in growing organically. You can hire more people, for instance, and then there are things that you can't do in growing organically. You might not be able to do M&A. One thing that Voltus was thinking of is we're an international company, but we have markets in just North America. And we probably couldn't expand to another country unless we had hundreds of millions of dollars on our balance sheet. So that international expansion is something that would have needed significant amounts of funding. From the defensive side, it's an arms race, right? It's if everyone in this industry of clean tech is going through SPACs, then we don't want Voltus to be the one that's left out. In the end, the company was, over the course of that year, from a C-suite, from a legal perspective, very busy in going through the process of what it would look like to SPAC. And in not pursuing it, I more see that as good management, because we didn't want to go through a process, see employees rewarded out of the stock options that they had, only to then have those options significantly diminish in value. So we did not end up going through it. I think an IPO is in our future at some point. As far as when, that's under consideration. So the last point here on companies, having given you a little bit of history around Voltus starting and hiring, finding your product, fundraising is just how to maintain a culture. Every single company will say they have a great culture. Probably a couple people in the room will soon be going through hiring process for full-time employment, and you'll just find that every company is like, we have a great culture. I would advise you from a employee or applicant perspective to really try to dig into asking about that culture, asking about team dynamics, because it is important. So this is my sort of oversimplification of the two things that provide a good culture as I've seen at Voltus. First, on the third point, it is bold, but the company does try to say, and say it regularly, that we want working at Voltus to be the best professional experience of someone's life. So that is what we give ourselves as the bar to surpass. And I think that pressures our C-suite team on, well, actually, how do we achieve that? The first is great people. And so that's where I come from, talking about bright, gritty, and good. But also in trying to protect that culture, great people ends with a 5-round interview process, which starts with our recruiter and then someone like me, and you keep going up the rungs and you end up with a founder, either Dana, our president, Matt, or another C-suite executive. And they want to talk to someone that is not dependent on being at director or VP level. That is for every position in the company. We're 280 people or so strong, and we're still going through founder interviews. And then the second piece is just a good energy, right? And positive energy. We talk a lot about at Voltus, a lot of companies use this phrase, but doing well by doing good. It's kind of our approach to say, here is a way to lower carbon emissions. We've reduced about 50,000 metric tons so far this year, but also a way to do that good by doing well. And that's making dollars for our customers. And then we also, in being a virtual company, want to convene people, and we want to get them together in person. So we talk a little bit about, is there an annual way that we can get people to get to know people cross-functionally? As far as Voltus has been around, there's been a 1 week out of every year Voltus Fest. It's in a different metropolitan area. This year it's in Chicago at the end of this month, and it's our chance to do certainly a little bit of the work and kind of upskilling, but also just complete team bonding exercises, right? We have an ongoing annual pickleball tournament. We have karaoke nights. I hear this year there's a Gatsby party being planned. So you do want to create an actual good culture for the company too. So now getting into the second part of the energy perspective is, why be in this business, or where is this business going? Where are the entrepreneurial opportunities? This is a little bit of a maybe refresher for some, maybe brand new information for others. But this is where Voltus fits in to the need to reduce carbon emissions worldwide. So you can see the perspective of the amount of energy as a percentage of carbon emissions at 72%. Voltus is trying to be a energy efficiency platform that can lower emissions worldwide. And that's in recognition of 2022, there were 22,000 terawatt hours of energy usage around the globe. By 2050, that's projected by the Energy Information Agency within the US to be 40,000 terawatt hours of electricity usage. In other words, doubling. Certainly you have more usage in developed countries, but there's also significant usage to come in developing countries where more people are gaining energy access, which is a great thing, but certainly something to work towards in reducing that energy before we have such significant growth. And then all this leads into metric tons of carbon emission per year. Last year, it was about 37 gigatons of carbon emissions that were reduced. It's good that that was a slower growth rate than the year before. 2021 had about a 6% growth rate. That past year was 1%. However, a little bit of that is the rebound from COVID and just kind of life slowing down. As far as entrepreneurial opportunities within the sector, I just displayed a bunch of businesses here as an effort to show all the different ways to get into, I'll say, clean tech or addressing carbon emissions. Certainly energy is, like I said, a significant proportion of that. So all of these companies have in their own way, ways to reduce energy, or I should say carbon emissions. Energy obviously is going to be cleaner sources, more efficient sources like Voltus has. Transportation similarly is going to be our shift to electric vehicles. Industrial is, think of the emissions that can come from the creation of steel or the creation of cement, or even the aviation industry and its usage of sustainable aviation fuels. Agricultural is going to be reducing emissions from livestock and of those methane and nitrous oxide that comes from the cultivation of livestock and the actual land management. And then finally on waste management, that just comes from in storing, decaying food matter and packaging matter, the methane emissions that come from that as well. Voltus obviously has some William & Mary people. So does Octopus Energy. I'm positive that Tesla does. And the only other one I wanted to shout out was Babylon under agriculture is actually just based out of Richmond. So there's clean tech in our area too. And certainly there's an environment of William & Mary students who are in these companies. I'm certain there's some that I don't know about as well. Finally, on growing a company and on the kind of energy piece here is what I imagine at one point and positive at one point that Voltus's leadership had to decide, and that is how to raise capital. So these are a little bit of an oversimplification, but a particular 5 ways to raise capital, especially for those industries that are more nascent and newer. You might know the acronym FOAK, first of a kind, right? So first on venture funding. I won't go too much into these. Eric Berg covered them very well last time, but venture funding you can think of as very high as far as the dollars associated with it. Venture funding especially wants to find those exponential growth opportunity companies that are headed potentially towards unicorn status. It is also the most expensive type of capital. They're incredibly diluted. Philanthropic is going to be a little bit less as far as the cost of capital and its dilution potential, but it is going to have a higher transaction cost. And it's also not as scalable. These might be family offices, right? That for our sector want to see clean energy technologies grown, but they don't have all the capital to continue with a multi-round investment in a company. Third is strategic investment. This comes from, as I'm sure you all know, established companies in the space that want to develop technologies that could be beneficial to their business, that maybe want to invest just to keep an eye on companies that are possible competitors or contributors. This capital can be very helpful in that you find industry experts to advise you. It can also be, though, restrictive in that a company may, in investing in a younger startup, have a right of first refusal and not and potentially limit the growth of that company in seeking funding elsewhere. Fourth of 5 is government funding. A good example of this, I'll touch on a little later, is an office in the federal government called the Loan Programs Office. but other federal opportunities are mostly grant funding or loan authority programs. It can be very significant amounts of funding. The transaction costs here are probably highest of all five in just the regulatory, legal work needed to verify that this company is a strong investment. And then finally, on project financing, I don't have particular examples of company that do this work, but I know that there are several. And this is not going to be investments defined for first of a kind projects. Project financing is not, for instance, going to invest in small modular nuclear reactors, but perhaps they might for critical mineral mining. So it might be a third of a kind or an nth of a kind investing in project financing. Switching hats now, moving more towards the policy side. I've loved working at Volts as full-time. I often like to say that that position has like my brain, I think my career interests. What has my heart is the local city council and serving in Williamsburg. So switching now to how we try to benefit the local business community on a policy side. First method is the Economic Development Authority. And I did promise Barb she'd be in a picture later. So that is Barb in what I think is a shawl of some kind, but quite stylish. And that is our cutting the ribbon at actually a local business incubator, I might call it, an area where entrepreneurs, mostly it seems like that with retail style businesses or service style businesses can find their small office place. So the Economic Development Authority is the city of Williamsburg's department led by William & Mary alumni, Yuri Adams. And what they do is they try to be a one-stop shop for businesses in Williamsburg to be aware of opportunities, but also to help with networking, right? So they will hold the business roundtables for those interested in business entrepreneurship in Williamsburg. I encourage you to come to the business roundtables that we now hold quarterly. They're also going to be aware of the innovations or the hardships in the business sector and dole out business appreciation awards. And then they'll finally work with businesses in a recruitment capacity and provide tax credits, for instance, to try to recruit some to Williamsburg. Examples of those that have come from such processes, which I think are beloved in the community, Carious Beer Hall, Mellow Mushroom, and most recently approved, but not yet, the ribbon has been cut, is just down Richmond Road. There used to be the Yankee Candle, delightful place where, it snows inside and just smells wonderful. Yankee Candle has closed, as we know, and the EDA led what council then approved, which was a tax credit package for I'll call it one-stop shop entertainment venue. It has mini golf, it has indoor bowling, it has a bar. So, everything you could want in life. And they're going through the process of what is capital construction costs, what are the operational expenses for them. The two other things on this piece were first, Yes Williamsburg. This is a website that you can go to, yeswilliamsburg.com, and it shows where are the grant opportunities for your business, your small business, but also what is some really helpful conglomerated data around this area. It might be the heads in beds of our hotels. It may be the tourism statistics of Williamsburg year over year. And so Yes Williamsburg is a very helpful way that we can show a business. Do you want to put a bike rack out? Well, we have a grant for that. Do you have e-commerce capabilities? We have a grant for that too. Or if you're a prospective hotel in the area or a retail shop and you want to see what the foot traffic is on this street or what the visitation is in a normal June month in Williamsburg, you can go to Yes Williamsburg. Final piece on this local work is how does Williamsburg, the council, the staff, other businesses, the entrepreneurship hub, how do we try to grow the entrepreneurship ecosystem of Williamsburg? And for this, I credit the Entrepreneurship Hub as being a great place to convene if you're a student, if you're a local resident for such work. We also try to grow the visitation of Williamsburg. Council's approved in just the last couple of months financing and an authority to eventually create a sports complex in the city. There's conversations around a live performance arts venue that would put more heads in beds in the city and give us another tourism asset that wouldn't take away from the historical character that we celebrate, but also give us something else to bring people who might not choose Williamsburg as their place of vacation here and on a regular basis. We also have joint authorities, as I got to talk about earlier with Donna, around local counties and institutions such as William and Mary, the one closest by would be Launchpad, right? Where if you're a business seeking office space, seeking mentorship, there are opportunities for your gaining that. Final, second to last, I should say, slide for me is still on this policy piece, but maybe now putting a little bit on my public policy major hat. An example, a case study of how federal legislation was intended and is currently working to spur investment in the private space. And so this is August 16th of 2022 enacted by the Biden administration, what I'm sure we've all heard about, which is the Inflation Reduction Act. It will be decades before economists, industry professionals can determine the value of such legislation, but I can at least say for now that it has spurred hundreds of millions of dollars in private sector investment in the US. And from a capacity of tax credits rather than a regulatory space. So leading with the carrot rather than the stick in that way. This has led to 80 megawatts of new clean energy, gigawatts, important difference, of clean energy generation. And it's also increased the authority, the loan authority of an institution in the federal government that may be of interest to people in this room, and that org's the Loan Programs Office. I shared a second ago a slide on a bunch of different new companies in industry and agricultural and energy, but I failed to say a point which I was going to make, which is you don't have to go into startup private enterprise ecosystem to be a benefit to the climate. Any company, any institution can wonder how they can lower their own carbon emissions. You also certainly can find such positions in the nonprofit or the government space. And so as an example of this federal legislation benefiting now the private sector, the Loan Programs Office has loan authority for onerous or first of a kind projects, which could be of benefit to reducing carbon emissions in the US. And they are able to give these loans out to hard to invest in sectors. They have, over the lifetime of the office, a 3% default rate and have actually made money for the federal government. And as an example of things they've invested in, lithium mining and nuclear reactors are two that they have historically been able to seed funding for in the United States, expecting a return from it, but at a way that can actually create these companies. So second to last slide for me is additional resources here. I'm sure we have some MBAs in the room. There's such value you can get with a degree like that. It, like any information, can also be found in libraries to a degree. And so I wanted to share some resources that I like to read regularly or have read. First on just sites and news sources. If you're looking for hyper-specific ones on whatever industry you're in, Industry Dive is great. I read Utility Dive, for instance, which just talks about the utility space, but they do this for every industry. A little more general, Journal and The Economist are fantastic. And then maybe quick reads, Axios and Semaphore and Substacks, right? Since they're multiple authors, are fantastic ways to learn about the space or topics you're interested in. As far as books, these are some of my favorite business themed books that I've read. The first is, for those interested in product and how to design it and where to build it, Build by Tony Fadell. He was the chief designer of the iPod at Apple before starting Nest, which was then bought by Google, became Google Nest. And he talks about the nuances of how to build a great product and then actually scale it to the marketplace. Second is a little bit more for those go-to-market oriented people, salespeople, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, former chief FBI negotiator. And Chris Voss speaks here around how he would negotiate with people in hostage situations or people who threaten terrorism in explosions next to federal buildings, and how he can talk them down. And he gives a lot of very good advice about how you can actively listen to people and you can mirror them. And it's a great way to learn how to negotiate. Two others would be The New Geography of Jobs by Enrico Moretti. It's an interesting way to show that, of course, we have hubs of economic activity in the US like Silicon Valley or Cambridge, Massachusetts, but there are also several moderate to small size cities which can benefit from a new geography of jobs. I read this and got really excited for Williamsburg. It was in 2021 when I read it because it talks about the new age economic opportunities allowing more virtual work and work done remotely, and how Williamsburg, situated so close to many great assets, but is such a historic and unique and special community ourselves, can benefit from a workforce that historically we haven't seen. Fortune at the bottom of the pyramid is a really good read. Michigan MBA professor named C.K. Prahalad, who talks about business as a moral imperative. And in trying to do so, talks about how go-to-market strategy for companies are usually targeted at the affluent communities and countries, right? But that at the bottom of the pyramid, where there might be more of a population, but not as much economic power seen, there can be significant wealth building opportunities that not only help the bottom line of a company, but also benefit the people in an area. Examples like this being one of the Unilever companies figuring out how they can modularize their cleaning supplies. I remember it being shampoos, into a way that could benefit communities which did not have great access to soap. And a second way would be in Latin America, a major construction company there, Cemex, innovating around an idea of doing project financing at low loan rates for people who might not have initial capital for the additions to their homes that they were hoping to put on. Additions being a one-room house into a two-room house, for instance, but could over time. Finally, if you're interested in climate tech, speed and scale is great. It comes from John Doerr, a well-known venture capitalist. And the last one was just a recent read of mine that I loved. I was going through the airport one day and passed through a duty-free store, and I was walking through with a little bit of an idea of like, who buys these colognes and all this booze and this, milk, chocolate, caramel infused candies, right? And so I was kind of curious, well, how duty-free store grow as a company? And it was started by a guy named Chuck Feeney, who over the course of his life accrued about $8 billion from the recurring capital dividends of expanding the duty-free store empire. Yet at the end of his life, he passed away in just October of last year, renting an apartment in San Francisco. So over the course of his life, he not only accrued such money and then gave it all away. And so it's an amazing biography about an outstanding business person, but one who approached this sector not just as, let me gain as much wealth as I can and then enjoy the spoils of it, but let me actually see how I can benefit others with it. So I'll just say thank you all so much for having me. I've got both emails there and my cell phone. And the last thing I thought I'd share is, I think everyone's probably aware of, if you're in this world, the well-known Teddy Roosevelt Man in the Arena speech, and how you don't want to be one of the cold and timid souls that knows neither victory nor defeat. It is a tried and true mantra of people in some level of entrepreneurship. Another thing that motivates me, though, in just loving this kind of work, in wanting to start my own venture before I'm 30, let's say, is this idea from a gentleman named George Bernard Shaw, and a quote that he has that I'll paraphrase just slightly. And it's the idea that the reasonable person adapts themselves to the world. The unreasonable person adapts the world to themselves. So therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable person. I see entrepreneurship as doing that. For all the naysayers out there, these are the crazy few who think they can do something great and oftentimes ends up doing so. So thank you all so much. Happy to take questions. Hey, Barb.
So Graham, thank you. It was very informational. I really appreciated learning a lot more about what you've been doing these past few years. But Graham mentioned that you recently helped Voltus get a state contract.
Yep.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this has actually been, for me, probably the most exciting thing professionally I've worked on. It is the only thing that has paired, in a way, my love of local government for Voltus work. As I mentioned, we deal in the US and Canada. There's 9 RTOs, regional transmission organizations, that we work in. And so we have products across North America. One of the biggest business opportunities we have had recently is a large RFP that, after 6 years of service from a competitor of ours, was going out to market to bid. And this is all the public entities in the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth, all of their demand response business. To give you some reference, an average deal for us, the metrics we use are in megawatts. So it's less than 5 megawatts, usually trending more towards 2 megawatts. Total size of this portfolio was 180 megawatts. So it's really sizable for us. Certainly a great revenue opportunity. Also pretty close to our mission too, of if you're a K through 12 school or a wastewater treatment plant, your mission's not just your bottom line finances, it's educating the future, et cetera. So we want to be able to serve these sites well. So it took a multi-month effort, but I was able to lead as the business development guy in Virginia at the time, the effort for the company to put out our bid. That is, what split share would we be willing to share with Virginia? We went really aggressive there. It was talking a lot about our technology stack. It was also offering more ancillary benefits. So one example would be we are contractually obligated to hire interns from Virginia universities now because we put that in our bid. And I appreciate the question because I failed to mention on the slide about hiring that Voltus is hiring. So sales operations interns, lead generation interns, and then certainly entry-level full-time positions we're currently hiring for and wanting to find Virginia public university applicants. So that was the effort, recognizing private sector moves faster usually. Bottom line, they're great. They'll sign a contract. Public sector is slower. There's the process of RFP and the multiple months that goes into developing that. It actually was awarded. I'm sorry, it was awarded as a no bid. And then about 6 months later, they just redid the whole process. So I actually had a real Groundhog Day moment of doing it twice in May and October of last year. But eventually Voltus did win that. So I've gotten to enjoy now, as far as Williamsburg goes, talking to some of these sites close by. William and Mary is a customer. Eastern State Hospital is a customer. So some examples of local folks that are. Thanks. Yeah.
Our first great presentation, Caleb. And then second, on one of your slides, you said you guys had recently opened up I forget how you paraphrased it, almost like a pseudo incubator somewhere around here. And I looked over at Graham and asked him about it. He said, "Oh, I'm not sure."
That was the ribbon cutting with Barb.
Yeah, the
I
ribbon
didn't
cutting.
recognize that building.
Yes, yeah, so yeah, good question. So this is it was more a facility that we were opening up. We were transitioning from a facility which was called Work Nimbly and managed by some entrepreneurial people locally. And now it's being managed by a group called Maximum. Lawrence Golson and Tawana Golson are the two folks to know there. Recent Small Business Administration award winners in our area. And so they were new owner operators of the space and converting it into an area which had some available office
Can you
space.
go into, so I know you said they kind of are more focused on regional and services as well. Could you go into a little bit more exactly kind of what their mission is and what services they provide to say, like we were to go, not that we want to leave the hub. I love the hub so much, but it's an interesting opportunity.
Yeah, so I think they have a similar mission and for that reason are in touch frequently with Brandon and Graham. As far as grant opportunities, I wouldn't know if they lead with an investment round as also giving an office space available, but G and I are overdue for having a cigar soon. So, we're friends. I'd be happy to put you in touch with him. He's a great guy. And it's just nice to have him and Tawana so active in the area. He's also the president of the NAACP because he's got a great network and then can grow some of these, at one point performing facilities, which maybe needed new energy into hopefully new incubation spaces. Maybe one last thing you might be interested in is he has a new space called Make Your Merch. And it allows for printing on t-shirts, 3D printing. And so that from a retail perspective, may be of interest as a place entrepreneurs can go and either at very cheap rates, I would imagine, or potentially even free, get to use some of their services as a launch pad of their business.
All right, cool. I definitely want to try to connect us all next year or something.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Caleb.
Brandon, you had a question too?
Yeah, I was curious, because you're unique in the sense that you have one foot in an entrepreneurial space, another foot in policy as you shared that passion. But can you speak to how sort of thinking and working in an entrepreneurial sector has informed or influenced how you operate in the policy sector or vice versa? How those things intersect and overlap?
Yeah, so I'll first say I've been really pleased from a policy perspective and starting with Williamsburg, which I knew even before council in actually just how innovative our team is. We've gone up for Smart City Awards. We've been recognized for Innovations Awards around engaging the public. So I was pleased that even though the outside view of our area may be older, historic, quieter community, our city leadership strives for new ideas. I think what I've been benefited from in my full-time role is particular to carbon emission reduction, ideas about how to get Williamsburg there. So I mentioned the audit. This is something that council and I know Barbara has supported as well, of seeing Williamsburg as, even though it's a small community, one that should not, like others, not think about the reduction of their own environmental footprint. We emit every year 3,450 metric tons of carbon emissions, which is what the audit elicited. That's peanuts compared to some industries or some cities, but I think there's something poetic in a small city doing this emission reduction work, because if we're so old and we can do it, why can't others? And we could lead a model for what it looks like for small cities to do this. So it helps there certainly from just the standpoint of how to reduce our emissions. I think generally too, entrepreneurialism, obviously I go back in history in the presentation to 2011, company starting in 2016. I started at Volsys in 2021. So I can't say I was a part of the founding team, certainly, but it helps in just trying to be an outside of the box thinker. And so for instance, with the Virginia RFP coming due, we were able to really try to get creative in showing what's the Voltus spirit on top of just how much money can we earn you as a Commonwealth. An example there might be, well, it's helped me to know how much people benefit from utilizing the tech, and we built a demo for Virginia in that way. It's kind of an outside of the box thinking. So it's helped to bring that to council, and I've been really happy that ideas are considered amenable from this council, and that new ideas are not outside of our consideration. Sports complex, like I mentioned, is just one of them. Cool. Thanks. Yes, sir.
You have a great time. Appreciate you coming. I have a question. Left William and Mary.
Yeah.
You're going out in the world.
Sure.
Why Voltus?
I'm going to say I left William Mary to go across the street where I lived and started working full time. So
Okay.
yeah. I was very briefly at a real estate company locally. I really enjoyed my colleagues. It was an interesting world. It was dealing on the peninsula for commercial real estate, small size commercial real estate. I didn't think it was the long-term career for me. So my thought process at the end of 2020 was, if I am to shift industries, I want one to feel very good about joining. That goes back to the doing well by doing good piece. And addressing climate change was the one that is a huge umbrella, certainly, but the one that I settled on. So why Voltus? Funny enough, is in a way because they on their application didn't require a cover letter. And so I was applying a lot of places, and Voltus did not make you write one of those cover letters, but they were also hiring. The Series B had been closed a couple months before I applied, and within 9 days of sending an application in on Sunday, I had the job. So I think I landed in sales and feel really happy to have done that, and landed at Voltus too. Energy is the biggest machine in the world, if you think about it. So it's a fascinating world to join, but I kind of lucked into it.
One thing I think we all forget that when Caleb graduated, the pandemic was upon us.
Right.
So, everything was virtually
Right.
shut down. And so I think trying to navigate hiring and what companies were still in business and growing was much harder than now and when I was going through that process, for sure.
Yeah, the other stipulation was it was climate and virtual work. So Voltus is just completely virtual. It's allowed me for several years to work off of Richmond Road, which has been interesting from a capacity of the house next to where I lived was often where the last day of class parties were held. And I would have to go to a coffee shop because it was so loud I couldn't talk on the phone, which my job was around. But it's been nice being really close to the community. Donna, you had a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. I appreciate your slide on culture, and really focusing on your employee value proposition. I've been working with some small business owners and trying to help them understand how to stand out in today's job market. And so one of the things I have is on your watchwords. Can you talk a little bit about the process for developing those and what made that a priority for the company?
Yeah, I can probably better address what makes it a priority.
Mhm.
Developing those were before my time. I remember preparing for the interview, trying to think of examples where I was bright, gritty, and good, because I thought it might come up as an interview question. The reason is, it's so helpful to be able to say, like, is this applicant not only a good applicant, but do they fit our culture of what we want the company to be? And so there are areas of that that you might not think of unless you develop such watchwords. So for instance, everyone wants bright applicants. I mean, you want people that are smart, right? But gritty is a new one. I mean, that's hyper competitive, not with each other, but in the industry, right? And that's willing to get to work. I think grittiness is helpful to think about. On good, one of the things that's on our website is we want working at Voltus to be filled with love and compassion. And that sounds kind of flowery, but actually I think promotes a workspace in which we're all virtual of you feel great about calling up your colleague and asking a question or saying, you know, you just had a baby, send me some pictures. So the development of them, that moment, I wasn't there for it, but I've seen the benefit of finding those watchwords. So if I were a founder or someone that you're advising, Donna, who's in this work, what I'd suggest to them is the ethos of what they want their company to be, distill that into no more than 3 words, and maybe even just 1 word. And then actually in the interview, like, ask people around that, character, those characteristics, and then try to figure out how you can market that too, so people are self-selecting into wanting to work at that company.
Thanks for
All
coming,
right.
Caleb.
Yeah.